Hey everybody, it's Astrobear here. Today I'm going to be doing a track breakdown of my recent release called Palindrome. Some people have told me they liked the sound design in it, especially the FM bass, so I am going to walk through how I made those sounds. Let's take a look. Alright, first I think we should just listen to some snippets from the song to get some context before we dive into how to create the different sounds. So I guess we can just jump into the intro. So this is the main bass and kick, actually all rendered as one track. And then I'll jump ahead. I'll talk about the percussion sounds a little bit because those are kind of fun. And then we introduce some of the sounds that will be coming in the breakdown. We'll build back up to the second drop, which is pretty similar to the first one, just with some extra sounds going on. Yeah, so just in the second layer, the second drop, we'll have this kind of extra harmony, which kind of carries us into the outro where we go into a more harmonic section. So the first sound to walk through is the bass because it kind of carries the track. It's like the main idea. And you can hear the kick and the bass are actually rendered as like one sound. I sound designed them as like one unit. I just really wanted the kick and the bass to work well together, and it was easiest to kind of like approach it as like one sound, like a kick with a tonal tail. Okay, so now that we've restored this track, we can take a look at the synth patches that made this bass sound. We can see there's two layers. One of the layers is just for the kick drum. It sounds like this. Just a nice punchy kick drum. It's synthesized with phase plant. If you look up my video on how to synthesize drums like Noisia, I walked through like reverse engineering one of their kicks just to get like the clipping right, get all the envelopes right, and then I often just like load that patch and then like tweak it until it fits the song. Like I could just like just showing you some of the parameters I might tweak. Yeah, so just with a little bit of tweaking of those envelopes, you can like kind of affect how it sits in the mix. And then also this group kind of has the top layer. So you can hear as I tweak the harmonic of this higher pitched oscillator, you can kind of affect where the transient sits in the mix. And then I also just decided to layer in this sample just to give the transient like a little more texture. Um, and yeah, just like tweaked it until I kind of found where it sit nicely, especially in the context with the bass. All right, so next let's talk about this bass. So we have a sub oscillator, which if I were to turn off the other two and disable the effects, you'd hear it sounds like a sub, except there's also some unison without stereo spread, so it's mono, but the unison voices are kind of wobbling the sub, so it's not like a consistent volume. It's kind of going up and down in volume and a little bit in pitch. So yeah, then there's two other oscillators, which are harmonics of the sub. So we have the third harmonic and the fifth harmonic, and all of these are FM each other. So the fundamental FMs, both the third and the fifth, the third FMs the fifth, and the fifth FMs the fundamental. So there's this kind of feedback loop of FM where they're all modulating each other in kind of like a loop or a circle. And then this drive amount, there's just one macro knob that opens up this patch throughout the song. This will increase the FM amount. Like you can see that dotted arrow that goes down and has the like multiply symbol. That's just saying that when you turn this drive all the way down, it's multiplying this FM amount with 0. So you get no FM when the drive's all the way down. And when you turn the drive all the way up, you get the maximum amount of FM. So if I were to turn this way up, you can hear it gets much more aggressive. And so like this is more like a kind of like percussion driven song. So of course I don't have the aggressive bass turned up all the time, but just at different fills throughout the song. Like whenever there's gaps, especially like right at the end of a bar, I will have the like aggression turn all the way up. And then if we turn on those effects, that's also giving part of the aggression. So this lane 1, there's saturation, a low pass filter, more distortion, a high pass filter, which cuts out the sub, but we'll talk about how we get the sub back in a second. There's a faturator, which is just another style of distortion. A notch, or sorry, what's this called? A peak filter, I think. And more distortion and a filter. So lots and lots of processing, and including removing the sub. And the reason for that is that this effects chain, you can turn the mix down. So when the mix is all the way down, essentially when this drive is down, we get none of this chain. And when we turn this up, we get up to like 75% of this chain. So as we get more aggressive, we're kind of dropping the sub out a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I can show you what this sounds like turned all the way up again. So it's kind of too much when it's turned all the way up. It's kind of meant to be like swept into that maximum amount. Okay, and then the next part I want to talk about is just a little bit of the sequencing. I actually got a comment when I released the song on YouTube that someone liked the sequencing, and I was really happy they picked it out because the sequencing is the inspiration of the song. The title is Palindrome, and the pattern of the kick drum is actually a palindrome. So what a palindrome means is that the word spelled like in like linguistics or in language, when you spell a word backwards and forwards and it's the same word, it's a palindrome. So like the name Bob is a very simple palindrome because spelled forward, it's Bob. Spelled backward, it's also Bob. There's some really weird ones, like race car is actually a palindrome. If you spell race car backwards and forwards, it's the same thing. So the palindrome here is in the distance between the kick drums. So like right now I have the grid set to eighth notes, and you can see there's 4 eighth notes between this kick and the next one. Then there's 3, 2, 3, 4. So the kick drum has this sort of like, it gets more dense, like 4, 3, 2, then everything's close together, but then it's very balanced. It goes back 3, 4. So the song has this, I think it gives us this sort of like bouncy or like cyclic feeling. Oh, and before I forget, I should mention that on the sub bass channel, we have the shaper box, which is how we're um, essentially ducking the bass out of the way when the kick drum hits. So if I were to solo this channel and then turn this off, you can see the sub has its own transient. But then when we turn this on, the sub is ducking out of the way. And so it makes space for the kick drum. And that's done by, there's this external instrument in Ableton, and you just send that MIDI to this shaper box. No, actually, you do have to do it this way. If you want a MIDI trigger, you do have to send an external instrument. You could do an audio trigger as well, but then I don't think it's as sample accurate. So this was the most sample accurate way I could get it, was sending MIDI from the external instrument to the shaper box, and then it just ducks out for, this is like half of an eighth note, so for about a 16th note. And then, I just dial this around and look at the rendered waveform, and pretty much until I got like the sub to come in right after the tail of the kick, then I was satisfied with the shaper box. And then there's some DSM, which is my favorite compressor at the moment. It's a spectral compressor, so it actually does the compression in the spectral domain. It does the FFT first, and so that makes it similar to a multiband compressor, like a multi, like say like OTT has 3 frequency bands, except those frequency bands are created with a filter, whereas these frequency bands are created with an FFT. So that it's supposed to retain more of the like phase information, which is good for transients. This isn't supposed to be marketing for DSM, but it is my favorite compressor for that reason. I think it handles the transients nicely. Let's turn that on and off. So you can see the mids get a lot warmer with this compression. Next up, there's Saturn 2. This is very subtle, I think. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the bus processing, just because that affects the bass tone so much. So the bass, along with all the drums, gets routed to this bus. And while I was walking through the sound design, I had it this disabled, just so you had a better idea of what the patch sounded like on its own. But if I enable this, you can see the tone is changing. It's kind of fitting into where it wants to sit in the song, and also the level is getting a little louder and a little more, especially when you bring in the other drum sounds, it'll get more balanced. So this chain has another DSM compressor, this time with like a tape curve, so it's supposed to emulate the saturation you'd get on a tape machine. Glue compressor, limiter just to level out all the sounds, especially when you bring the percussion in. Let's just solo this bus with the percussion. So yeah, this limiter isn't even so much for the kick and the bass. This is more for some of the percussion sounds, just leveling it off when they're kind of summing together or kind of on top of each other. It brings the level down. Then I bring some of the transients back, since the limiter can squash it a little bit. A clipper to then go get rid of those transients once again. And then lastly, there's just an EQ that changes the balance a little bit. So pretty subtle, and probably these type of moves would be for making space with other sounds, more so than, making it sound objectively better with or without this EQ. Probably more of a mixing decision. All right, next up, I guess while I've already enabled the drums to show the bus processing of the bass, might make sense to walk through the drums next. So like I said, the kick was basically rendered with the bass and kind of sound designed with the bass in mind. So we've already done that, but then next I have these hi-hats. And then we got the snare. I have it frozen because of CPU processing, but you can see there's just a snare from that sample pack. This multiband focus transient. This is a effect rack. I have a video on it. It's called like Focus Transients. And it's kind of emulating what some Oxford plugin does, some Oxford transient plugin. But just I didn't want to pay for it, so I tried to build something like it in a rack, and then some more clipping. So again, just choosing quality samples that already fit and doing some very light processing, more for mixing reasons than for any sound design there. And then we have these percussions. And these were rendered out. But I can tell you these are mostly like one shots, again, from the OZ sample pack for the majority of them. And then there's some like effects throws, like I'll throw a delay on sometimes. That was like a grain delay. There is some percussions that I think are worth going through the sound design. These ones. So this is one of my favorite parts of the song. I wanted these sounds to sound kind of like Looney Tunes, like when they're like when they're like revving up their legs, or I can't remember like exactly when they use that sound. I think yeah, it's like when they're like running really fast and they like have this kind of weird percussion sound. I just like wanted that. I just kind of felt these like bright colors in the song, like kind of like Looney Tunes, cartoony. Like, yeah, that's definitely the coolest part of the song, I think, objectively. Yeah, so I think I like first found this track is again those like one shots. That got pretty close. And this is a layer of that. I think I just needed some like beef, so maybe this is like a more compressed layer, and then this is like more of the transients. But yeah, I think this is part of what makes it so cartoony is, let's go find that track and look at how I made that. So drums. So, okay, this is based off of my TR-808 snare drum. So just the fundamental. I must have disabled the noise because I don't hear any noise, or it's a very low level noise. So yeah, I have a video if you look up TR-808 snare drum Astrobear or something like that. I walk through how to make a analog style snare and faceplant, but pretty much this square wave, it's not actually like an oscillator, it's used as a trigger. So you can see the envelope is only like 1 millisecond long. It's acting like how the actual 808 circuit has a trigger, and then it stimulates this filter. So you're really hearing like a filter resonate. It's a digital filter, but you know, it'd sound better obviously if I had an actual 808. But at the same time, this one could be tweaked more. Like the pitch, I like tweaked until it got with the fundamental of these percussions that I liked. So yeah, what I want to do, I think a good idea is maybe to mute this phase plant track in the context of the song, because you can see how it really like brings it forward and makes it a focus of the song instead of just being this kind of like background percussion accent. Yeah, so you can hear that this phase plant track is really the body of it. It's what brings it so forward. It's just you have this strong like 808 snare fundamental, but it's like pitched way up. So it's kind of cartoony. And then this layer, even though soloed, I can kind of like hear that kind of cartoony Looney Tunes thing. It's really in the mix. It's this phase plant one. Cool. That's my favorite part. So I guess the rest of this walkthrough, it's all going to be downhill from here, because I definitely can't top that. And there's not too much more to walk through anyways. especially since all this stuff is meant to be more of accents. So we just have some melodies. This I think was also some preset. Yeah, I just found this preset I liked. It's called Lead Sweetness. And I'm bringing that up because I think on this channel, I do a lot of sound design, but I don't want people to get confused that like when I make a track, I have to sound design everything. Like even though it's good to know how to make a kick drum from scratch, if that's not like the focus of the song, you don't need to be like making it from scratch each time. Like sometimes just pull up a preset or something and, get it to fit with the song. This one is actually just I think this is a reversed reverb, so it kind of sucks into the sound. If we play these together. Yeah, so just adding some texture. Here's just some sounds I got out of Serum. I won't walk through how I made those because they're not really a focus of the song, but we can hear in context. It gives the second drop kind of more of a cinematic feel. Like the beginning is quite minimal. Well, okay, I never do anything that minimal. That one has that like foghorn sound, but in the end, we have a lot more cinematic stuff going on. And then these serum patches are also what kind of carries us into the outro. Yeah, so just kind of from a song structure, I kind of wanted this ambient outro, and these kind of from in the middle of the song, we introduce them, and then at the end of the song, that's the focus, and we build up more and more layers so until they become the focus of the song at the end. Next, we have the effects. This is actually something that goes back to the bass sound design I forgot to mention. There's something I put in effects. I think it's just because of how I wanted them to be side-chained out of the way of the bass. But these are very similar to the bass. So, sorry about the organization, but yeah. Yeah, so you can hear these layers up here are kind of adding some like nice top end, making the bass a little more present in the mix. And they're actually also kind of like the intro to the song is these like higher, higher in pitch versions of the bass. That's how we introduce the song. But then throughout the song, a lot of times they're out of the way to make room for the percussion, and they just come in sparingly to like add some extra emphasis to the bass or draw attention back to it. And I will just unfreeze one of these quickly to show you. This is the same patch, except we don't have the kick drum here, of course. We don't need layered kick drums. But up here, you can see that it's the same patch, but these are different harmonics. Like instead of having a sub bass here, the sub is replaced by a third harmonic, a fifth harmonic, and a seventh. So they're all still like based off of the same fundamental note. They're just extra harmonics, but they're just set up differently and FMing each other differently to kind of almost harmonize with the bass, as I guess a way you could put it. And if I look at the other one, this again kind of follows a pattern. We had the bass starts on the fundamental, the next one started on the third, this one starts on the fifth and has the seventh and the nine as kind of the FM parts of the sound. All right, so that's the track breakdown. I hope you learned something useful. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out the track. It should be available on all like streaming platforms as of today, Spotify, Apple Music, etc. I'll give a link in the description. So yeah, thanks for watching.